Yo, what's up, YouTube? I'm back. I said I was going to make another YouTube video. I decided to make one about the San Francisco 49ers versus the Miami Dolphins. Joe Montana slash Steve Young versus Dan Marino. NFL, who's better? Now, this one's a very fun and very exciting video. This one won't be like all the other videos because this will be fun and exciting. And this will break down the history of both football franchises and why these franchises have a hard time trying to win a championship in today's digital age. So let's get to it. All right. The San Francisco 49ers got 6 championships. You know, just like the Pittsburgh Steelers, they got 5 to 6 Super Bowls. And each time they won a championship, it was because of a special great player that came along and dominated the game of football for a decade and a half. Like, we look at Joe Montana, one of the greatest professional football players of all times. A man who is respected, revered, cherished, and loved in San Francisco. And why the 49ers were dominant in that 2.5 or 3.5 decade, they managed to snatch up 6 championships. And as history has it, they probably could have won 7 or 8 championships had, they not traded Joe Montana away and kept Steve Young. The same thing that happened to Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck happened to Joe Montana. He broke his neck or he injured himself, and he ended up winning 3 or 4 Super Bowls, and they traded him away and kept Steve Young as the young hotshot quarterback. Of course, we had Jerry Rice on that football team. Of course, Deion Sanders came along onto the 49ers to help them win their 2nd championship. And there were a lot of great players at that time in the 1980s and the 1990s. And of course, in that same time period in the East, we had a team called the Miami Dolphins. Dan Marino in the Miami Dolphins. Before there was Peyton Manning, before there was Andrew Luck, before there was Tom Brady, before all these future stars came into the NFL, we had John Elway, Dan Marino, Steve Young, Joe Montana, and these were the players at the time of the 90s. Of course, you had wide receivers. You had Herschel Walker, to name a few. And this franchise only won 2 championships in a 50-year history. In 50 years, the Miami Dolphins only won 2 Super Bowls. But in their 2nd Super Bowl in 1972, they did something in history that only a few football teams has ever done. And we do know that there's a team by the name of the New England Patriots that actually tried to repeat that history and failed. This was the only football team to win all their games in the preseason, win all their games in the season, win every game in the playoffs, go into the Super Bowl, and actually go undefeated in the Super Bowl. And that's an impressive feat. 20 years later, we get Dan Marino, and he's our guy. He's our quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. One problem. His first year, he gets knocked out of playoff contingency because there's injuries, not enough firepower. His 2nd year, he does pretty good his 2nd year. So his 2nd year and his 3rd year, he makes it to the playoffs. He wins playoff games. And then year 4 or year 5, he makes it to the Super Bowl. In his prime, Dan Marino was kicking ass, taking names, throwing the football. There was nobody like Dan Marino. But when Dan Marino went up against the San Francisco 49ers, unfortunately, he got put in the straitjacket. No matter how many times he threw the football, no matter how many times he tried to blitz the defense, no matter how many times he tried to get out of pocket and throw the football, he just could not figure out this powerful offense of the San Francisco 49ers. And he would fall victim to this for years to come in his NFL career. After 5 years of professional football, by year 6, 7, and 8, Again, he was frustrated of being eliminated in the playoffs. And by the time he got to 10 or 11 years in his NFL career, he began to struggle with the idea that they would trade away some of his best players and give him second tier players. Instead of a first tier wide receiver, he ended up with a second tier wide receiver. Instead of him getting a defensive line, he got a sloppy defensive line. And the same thing with defensive tackle. And this went quite on for a long time in his NFL career. And then he would lose to John Elway and the Denver Broncos. Every single time they faced in the season, he would always lose to his arch nemesis, John Elway. And then he would lose to Joe Montana. He would lose to Steve Young. And by the time he approached 13 years of NFL, for 13 years, he tried. And by the time he got to his mid-30s, like 34, 35, close to 36, that's when he realized he just could not win a Super Bowl. And to this day, I still feel for Dan Marino to play 13, 14 years of professional football. And from the time your NFL career begins and to the time your NFL career ends, you never win a Super Bowl. You go down in history to be the best football player to play the game, but you also go down in history as the guy to never win the Super Bowl. You chasing this Vince Lombardi trophy for years, and you never get it. It's like this super hot, mega attractive woman, right? And you chase her for years and for years, but she keeps going to, bad boys, and you can't never get her. And by the time 10, 11, or 12, or 13 years go by, you come to the realization that if you couldn't get it from the very beginning to the time your NFL career closed, you kind of go and throw your hands up. What's the whole point of playing professional football if I can't win the damn thing? And I think that's exactly what bothered Dan Marino most about his NFL career. Let's not forget the coaches got fired and hired, getting into it with the general manager from time to time, because that's how good Dan Marino was. But he never lived up to the expectation of the two Super Bowl champions that came before him. Now, in San Francisco, they were winning Super Bowls. They were dominating the NFL. At that time, it was Dallas Cowboys or the 49ers, who is America's greatest football team. And everybody knew the answer was the San Francisco 49ers. Amazingly, it wouldn't be until around 2000 that the 49ers finally stopped winning Super Bowls, and there was a rift between Jerry Weiss and the organization. Finally, they got rid of Jerry Rice. Finally, they got rid of Deion Primetime Sanders. And this team now was depending on Steve Young to be the one to do it all. But Steve Young, by this time period, he got seriously injured. He wasn't the same player that he was in the early 1990s when he took Joe Montana's spot. And it proved that even though he won 2 or 3 championships himself, he never quite got to the same level as Joe Montana. And by the time we got to the 2000s, Steve Young was a shell of himself. And we never saw the 49ers ever return back to prominence ever again. And it wouldn't be until 2012 when we saw a resurgence of the San Francisco 49ers. All of a sudden, we had Colin Kaepernick. Of course, we had the coach that's a twin of the other coach from the Baltimore. Them two are twin brothers, but they're both NFL coaches. And we had a pretty good defensive line, one pretty good offense. And they had a chance to win a Super Bowl, but they lost to the Baltimore Ravens. And some San Francisco 49ers to this very day say, I was cheated. I was robbed. Again, it's like dating a super hot, attractive woman, and she says she likes you, but she doesn't love you. She says she wants you, but she wants to be your best friend. She don't really have feelings for you, but she does feel for you. And the 49ers were just never the same after that Super Bowl. You could see in Colin Kaepernick's numbers and production went down. You can see his work ethic wasn't there. Coach got fired, players got traded, and this organization has never returned back to that level ever again. So we're here to ask the billion-dollar question: which quarterback in the time of this was good? Now, for reasons, I'm going to say Joe Montana hands down was the best quarterback. I know some people will argue it's Steve Young, but I'm going with Joe Montana. I did see him towards the middle and the end of his NFL career as a kid, so I would say Joe Montana over Steve Young, even though some people might thumbs down this video because they're haters. And even though I like Dan Marino and the Miami Dolphins, we can't ignore the fact that they did go to a Super Bowl and they did beat the Patriots, but that was before Dan Marino got there. And if I feel bad for any football player of that era, I got to feel bad for Dan Marino, because out of Steve Young, Joe Montana, and John Elway, they won Super Bowls. And poor Dan Marino was left out of the club. And even to this day, when he does his little commercials on television, he may not talk about it, he may not say it, but every now and then in his own private moments, he do think about the what if. If only if I could have just won one Super Bowl in my NFL career, life would have been just simple. Hey, I feel the same. I feel the same way. If I could just get one fucking girl, life would be that much fucking simple. Unfortunately, life is not like that. You see the same thing happen to Peyton Manning's father. 13 years in the NFL, no Super Bowl. And sometimes that makes you scratch your head and it makes you wonder why some people are destined to win the championships and why others are not. Some people might say, well, for Dan Marino, it was injuries and fighting the organization. Now, today, who do I think has a chance to bounce back if they can work out their issues? I still think San Francisco still has 2 or 3 more shots at winning a Super Bowl. But I believe it's going to be somewhere around 2021, 2023. Somewhere in there, I believe they will get some trades, some draft picks, and they'll turn this organization around. Or for the 49ers to return back to their past glory, they're going to have to fire the coach. They're going to have to fire the general manager. They're going to have to fire the staff and start all over from scratch, because this organization has been known to be the best. And if the Miami Dolphins ever want to get their act together, they're going to have to start making some big-time trades and some draft picks, because once Tom Brady and the Patriots are no longer the team in the East, someone in the East has to ascend to that level. And in the last 7 years, Miami has been beating the Patriots in season games. And people are trying to figure, how is it that the Miami Dolphins can't beat nobody else but can somehow knock off a Patriots team with a Tom Brady on it? So that's my conclusion to this video. And then tomorrow, I guess I make that video about what happens when women reject you and how many times do you need to pursue a girl before it's time for you to move on. It's a video that has to be made, needs to be made, and then we'll return back to making some more NFL football videos. So I guess you'll like this video. Thumbs up if you like it. Thumbs down if you hate it. Tell me something good or bad in the comment section. Until then, peace.